JS Lit, I think that JSON library that PHP still uses or used to use. I think they switched it out.
Well, they switched to a new library in 7.2, right? Because it was faster to maintain.
Right.
Didn't have weird licensing.
Yeah, exactly.
Shall we?
Take it away, Chris.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
This is a PHP meetup, and you all came to hear about some JavaScript. So, no. This is gonna be good. I made a logo for tonight. It's React plus Spotify. Hello, that's me.
How much do you charge for something? $1 million.
Take SVG, take another SVG, stack them on top of each other. That's me. I'm on the internet. There's my GitHub, my Twitter, and my website. This is literally my website pretty much, so if you go there, don't be surprised if that's all you see.
Are you recording?
I am. Yeah, I'm doing QuickTime. So I initially volunteered to speak here because I was fun employed, and I was trying to get my own little thing off the ground. That was about 3 weeks ago. Then someone called me and offered me a job, and I took it. So, but I still had to come here and speak, so that's cool. If anyone is interested in Node backend, we are hiring, so you're welcome to talk to me. Good question. I'm still trying to figure that part out. Consolidated Knowledge is what they were known as. Now it's Elm Street Technology. They're building real estate apps. So, nothing too exciting, but it's a good little place to work with a good crew of people. So, but you came here to learn about React, so let's talk about React. React itself is a library for building user interfaces. So the idea of React is that you're going to keep your backend and your front end completely separated. Your React application is going to encapsulate your entire UI. It will hold the state of your application, and your UI will respond to that state. React does this by shipping a number of different things that you can work with. One of the biggest ones is the component that it ships. The component itself gives you different lifecycle methods that you can tap into in order to work with the state that's being passed into your application. So this first little thing is just like a don't freak out, but it's JavaScript. And it's, as Gordon mentioned, it's modern JavaScript, so you can see that we're using const instead of var, just because. Another thing that we're doing here is something that is not necessarily specific to React, but it's something that React utilizes, and it's a thing called JSX. And you see that here with the React element that's being created. You can tell that it looks like regular old HTML, but it's reading in functions from the JavaScript itself. So it's not necessarily a templating language. It's actually part of the JavaScript itself. It's just an extension of it.
That's native JavaScript, or that's React specific?
So
It
gets transpiled. So that's part of the modern JavaScript stuff that Gordon talked about. In order for a browser to read that, it would need to have the code to translate it into, JavaScript's all functions and objects. So it would transpile that into a function, which would then render to the DOM HTML. So that's what we see there at the bottom, the React DOM.render. That is specific to React. One thing that makes React special is that the renderers and the UI library itself aren't coupled. So you can build React components, and then you can run them inside of React Native. So you can compile that code down to Android, iOS. There's React VR now, so you can build UI components. I saw a demo the other day that someone took a charting library in JavaScript, and they used React to render charts in VR. It's like there were these 3D bar graphs that were stacked. It's like, ooh, the future is going to be exciting for people who like bar charts in VR. So cool. So what we have here, it's not really going to do much on its own. We need to somehow get that JavaScript to run in the browser. And so there's a million, there's a million different ways we can do this. The simplest being we put it in an HTML file, we put script tags to load in the React and the React DOM libraries, and then we just stick it in our application and let React DOM render it to our page. That's what Facebook recommends doing to get started, just to kind of get a feel for how everything is. The second way that they recommend you get started with React is with something called Create React App. So this is a tool that they shipped. It came out probably about 2 years ago. And it's just a CLI for getting started. It handles all of the configuration of the internals, the dev tools, everything that you're going to need to both develop and ship to production. Completely hands-off, it does it for you. So we'll be looking into that one tonight. NWB here is another one that gives you a little more flexibility with how you want to configure it. I've used that to ship individual components. So with React, we're kind of talking two different worlds. We're talking full applications that have a header, a footer, all those different components building a page. And then we're also talking individual components. So an example of an individual component may be like a type ahead input that as you type, it makes an API request and fetches data and brings it back and renders it on the page. There's plenty of components out there. I'll show you a couple examples tonight. So yeah, long story short, NWB makes it easy to package these components, whereas Create React App specializes in doing full applications. Some of these other ones are more specialized. Neutrino, I haven't had a chance to dig into, but it looks like it's highly configurable. Next.js and Razzle, both their specialties are server-side rendering. So with a regular client-side application, we're shipping an index.html file to the browser, and that's just going to have a div with an ID on it. And then our JavaScript will go ahead and write all of the content it needs to into that div. With Next.js and Razzle, once again, it's hands-off. You don't have to configure anything. They handle server-side rendering your entire application. So initially, when the user gets the page, the index.html that gets served to them is already going to have the div for the header, the footer, all the page content on it. And then once that renders on the page, then the scripts on the page will load, hydrate the page with all the data and everything else that it needs. That's getting pretty intense, but that's a really cool project that they've put together there. Yeah.
You mentioned the word HTML.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so we'll get to an example. But basically, our browser is going to read our HTML file that it gets when it pings the server. This is what it's going to look like. You've got your regular head. It's got a title. But with React, it's literally just, whoa, that is small. Now that is big. It's literally just a single div. After that, the JavaScript will all get injected into there. So it's all behind the scenes, hands off. But with something like Next.js, it's going to already come from the server injected into that div so that it loads faster on the client side.
You have multiple React apps.
Yes. Yep. I'm not sure, there's definitely reasons why you would do that. If you're starting an app from scratch, Create React App is definitely thinking more of single page application. But that's definitely a situation where you'll want, especially working with legacy apps, you may want to just ship Airbnb, for example. On their homepage, they wanted to start using React. So the very first component they shipped is the search input that's there. That was the very first piece of React code that they ever shipped. So the rest of their page was being rendered however, and Airbnb has completely changed since I've been here. Let's log out. Who knows? That's not what I thought it was going to be. But yeah, you can definitely have multiple, that React DOM.render, rendering to the DOM. We're targeting an element on the page, and then we're just rendering in whatever our React element is. So technically, you could render as many things as you want to as many divs on the page as you want.
Just don't overlap them.
Bad things could happen. Bad things will happen.
React will be very angry.
Yeah. So all of this, all of these different options, don't worry about them unless you want to actually start digging into how to build a React app. I would recommend Create React App just because that's what we're going to go over, and it's Facebook's thing, so it's kind of, it has the most documentation, really good community. The other option is rolling your own config. I'm sure that many of you at work and at home and everything else have done this before. You may have like a grunt build process, gulp, Webpack. There's a bunch of different bundlers now. So yeah, if you wanted to go about doing that, go for it. Create React App. Most of these actually are using Webpack under the hood to create the different JavaScript bundles. And having like messed around with Webpack configs for a few months, it was really nice when Facebook released Create React App, because it was like, okay, I don't have to mess with my build configs. I don't have to touch any of that stuff ever again. I can focus completely on building my apps and the UIs.
Until you have to do something that they...
Until you have to do something, which brings us to why would you want to use Create React App? Like I said, it's one dependency. Facebook maintains that dependency, and then it goes off and it installs everything else it needs. Some things that it uses are Webpack, Babel. So Webpack is the JavaScript bundler, and Babel itself is the transpiler to take it from the modern JavaScript to the JavaScript that the browsers can actually understand. ESLint is a linter for ECMAScript, JavaScript. So that's like a dev dependency that Create React App brings along with it. If you were doing this on your own, you would need to set up all that stuff independently. So yeah, no configuration, and then no lock-in, being that, like Gordon said, sometimes you may need to actually get down and dirty and configure your build process a little more than they want you to. So they offer an option to eject, which basically takes all the dependencies and copies them into your project, and you've got everything right there ready to go. That can also be a good option for when you're starting if you want to actually learn how the build process works. You can create a React app, you can immediately eject, and you'll kind of see how everything is pieced together. What's up?
I just take a picture. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I've
10 milliseconds behind you.
yeah, sorry. I'll post a link to the slides so you can go through, and there's like quite a few links on here, so you may want to click through them later. So Create React App. I'm just going to show a quick little how-to. So I'm assuming you already have Node installed, which means you have the Node package manager installed. So we're going to do npm install g create react app. So that's going to globally install that create react app CLI that Facebook has created. And there we go. And now to run it, we're going to do create react app init, and then whatever we want our app to be called. So I'll call my app hello world. Creating a new app in sites init. That doesn't seem right. Let's see if it actually goes into sites init or if it goes into hello world. So this step, be patient. It's a package manager running, doing its thing. Cool. So, that's weird. So it created it in a directory called init. Looks like I messed that up. Read documentation before you start doing stuff. But we can see here, this is our entire application. So you have an index file, that serves up a title and a div. You got a favicon if you're into those sort of things, which I am. Then you have your app itself, which the app code is going to be a React component. And you can see that all it's doing is it's rendering some divs to the page. Divs, headers, looks like a logo and some other stuff. So to get this started, we'll do npm start. That's going to run the development process. It's going to build it all so that we get stuff like live reloading. So there's that. Cool, so now like, hello. You get your changes instantly, which is really convenient. And you never have to worry about configuring any of that stuff. So with the ejecting from here, like it says, it's permanent action. Once you eject, you can't like opt back in to use React scripts, unfortunately. And so it went ahead and it took all those different dependencies that it was handling under the hood and it added them to our package JSON. And it updated some of our scripts that we were running to just trigger an actual node command. And it added a few configuration files to the project itself. So if we look at our package JSON now, it's a lot bigger and more complicated than it was when it was Create React App. So I recommend that if you do build a React app, if you don't want to spend as much time worrying about the bundling and everything else, try to use Create React App and try not to eject unless you have a really good reason. Yeah.
I was actually just reading an article about this a couple days ago, and another option is to actually fork the React scripts project and just take care of all of your dependencies there. That way you can still pull in upstream stuff from Facebook if needed, and still do your own thing with it.
Yeah, so that's definitely a good option. Yeah, it's really nice to be able to pull upstream in from Facebook, especially when they're updating dependencies. One thing that happened was they were using Webpack version 1. Webpack version 2 came out, and it came with a million new features. So the team over at Facebook figured out how to get it all integrated. They made it so literally when you updated your React scripts, it's not going to break anything that already exists. They're really good about that, which is surprising for the JavaScript world. The ecosystem has been very fragile over the past, forever. But especially a couple years ago, it was very fragile. And no matter if you were trying to run an Angular app or just even jQuery and Gulp, Grunt, everything else, it felt like it was always changing and there was always something to try and, you got to keep track of everything. And a lot of that has been pulled out and pulled behind the scenes so you don't have to worry about it as much.
Is using the Create React app recommended or not recommended?
Yes.
So if, let me finish this.
Oh.
If you're using React as part of some other system as opposed to just React app. Good idea, not a good idea.
Good question. If you're going to just be plugging in a React component into an existing application, then you probably want to look at one of those alternatives that I mentioned. They do kind of a better job of bundling up the individual pieces that they need. Especially in that situation, usually you're going to only want to import React once on the page, and you want to avoid that. There's a good chance that Create React App does that. I've just never tried. But I know for certain that something like NWB would be able to handle it. Cool. So that's Create React App, which I used to build the Spotify demo that I'm going to show you. Before we jump into the demo, let me hurry and go over a few things. We're going to be using the Spotify Web API. So when you were using the Spotify API with PHP apps, most likely you had a secret key that you would use to make the request to the server. Since this is all on the client side, we don't have an actual secret key, so we're going to require our users to log in to request data from the Spotify API. So The first page that you're going to see in the app is just a home page with a login button. That login button is going to send us, it's just a link off to Spotify's authentication service. That'll explain the scopes that our app is asking for, whether we need like just read permission on the account, if even that. I built this so that it doesn't require any permissions to your Spotify account. So, but if you wanted to build an app that actually like pulled people's playlists so that you could render them in a UI, that would be something that you could display in that scope. So the user will log in to the account, it'll authorize access, at which point the Spotify account service is going to redirect us back to our app with an access token in the URL. Our app will take that in, it'll parse that location, hash, and that access token. It'll set that in state, and then it will use that access token to make any additional requests to the Spotify web API. So that's kind of a high level of how that implicit grant flow is going to work. Another piece to the app that we're building is the fact that our user interfaces are finite state machines. So for example, we're going to have once we're authorized and into the application, we're going to have a search box. And so our user interface is going to react to any actions, and it's going to update the state accordingly. So when we trigger a search, then we're going to, our application is going to go out, it's going to make a request to the Spotify web API, and we're going to tell our application to be in a loading state. So we'll render a little spinner on the page. After that, our search will either come back as a success or a fail. If it comes back as a success, we want to take the results. We want to render the results to the page. If it comes back as a fail, we want to render an error message to the page, and we want to redirect the user back to take an action of searching. I started designing out this, flow chart, state machine diagram. I got bored after I got this far, so it should have kept going, but hopefully this gets the idea that we do an action, triggers a loading state, then we get back either a success or an error, and that's going to happen from the search to our artists, to our albums, down to the track. Another thing you're going to see in the application is routing. So in order for our browser to know where we are trying to navigate to, we need to hook into the browser's navigation API. And one way to do that with React is to use a project called React Router, or a library. And it's literally just React components that handle the routing. So you can see here that once we're authenticated in the app, we're going to land on a search page. That's going to render our search component, which I'll show you in a bit. Another route that we could land on could be our artist page, which would have an artist ID in the parameters. And that will render our artist component, and then down to the album, which will contain both the artist ID as well as the album ID. And this is the last slide before we jump into the app. So requesting data from the client side, I decided to use a library called Axios. You could use the browser's built-in fetch. You'd have to polyfill it if you wanted to support like IE and older browsers. Axios is a wrapper on top of XML HTTP request, I think. And it gives you a promise-based wrapper around the request. So when you do make a request, it's as simple as issuing a get, a post, a put, whatever you want to a specific endpoint. You pass in whatever options you need to, in this case, nothing. And then you get a promise in return. So you can see that we chain that promise with .then or .catch, depending on whether or not we get a response back from the server or if we get an error back from the server. At this point, rather than console logging, we would be hooking into the React components state in order to set the state and tell it that there's an error, or set the state and tell it that we got a successful response. So this is the app. No, that's not the app. This is the app. Yeah, we can use this one. So we land and we're just on the route / So we sign in, which takes us to Spotify's website. And you're logged in as Chris Heninger. Here's the, yeah, they don't do a very good job of like showing the actual things that your Spotify account is gonna have access to, but that's it, just the publicly available information. Okay, cool, so I'm signed in as myself. If we take a look at the network tab, you can see that I already fired off a request to me, api.spotify.com/v1/me, which gave us back a response of my user ID, an image that I threw in a little circle right there. And that also lets me know that, hey, I was able to actually successfully query the Spotify API. If that me call would have failed, then I would have already kicked you out of the app, which I didn't do any graceful error handling in this, so it would be a disaster. At this point, we've got our search box. This itself is a React component. I'm going to be hopping between like both the React Dev tools as well as my console and network tabs throughout the night. So this, actually, I'll wait to show React Dev tools until we're actually in a development environment. So this artist search would fire off that request, shows the loading state while that request is made. It's pretty quick, so we didn't really see anything there. Metal. Yeah.
Is it remembering your text for the browser, or does it have auto-type?
That was a browser autofill. And you know what? That was actually bothering me. So if we go to our search box component, we can kind of see what this component looks like. So the component itself is going to use React and the component class. We're going to import some CSS, which Gordon was kind of giving me a hard time. I figured if there's any group that's going to be excited for like a really pretty, nicely styled application, azPHP is the place to be. I'm like a designer by trade, or was in my past life, so I spent so much time making this pretty. I shouldn't have, but yeah. Hey, this guy. Whatever, man. I'm not even gonna go there.
Were those tabs rendered as two?
Two spaces. So this is our search box component. You can see that the component itself is gonna hold state. That state is going to be a string called query. What I have going on here is that when the page initially loads, I want to focus on that input. So you can see that I target the input itself and call focus on it.
Is that query just like its value?
Yeah, so that's what the value is going to be. So our input itself is going to store that value from the state. When we make a change on that input, we're going to call an onChange method, which takes an e, and we're going to record our new value as e.target.value, whatever the value of that input is, and we're going to set our state query to that new value. One thing about React is that all of the state throughout a React application needs to be immutable. So we can't take the previous state and just modify that object and pass it back in. We need to actually make a copy of that state or make a new object and send that new object on through. From there, our input is an input. I have a button, which the only reason it's a capital B is because I wanted to style my button. I wanted it to be like, green and nice. It matches the Spotify logo. So I created a little component called button. And so you can see here this button takes in children, which will be whatever is inside of the tag that gets rendered. Class name, which is the CSS class, and then element. In the case that I want to render a button as not an actual button, but as like an A tag, for example, on that homepage, I lied. I didn't use, oh no, I did. Hey, there we go. So I used the button tag, but I passed in an A tag so that I could then use ref. If this had been a button, then I would have needed to use like an onClick function.
Weird random question.
Yeah.
Doesn't it just use the value attribute of the element versus like you're storing that state that comes from value into this React class?
On the search box component itself. So there are two types of inputs inside of React, controlled inputs and uncontrolled inputs. If we wanted to, we technically don't need to declare like an on change and a value on this field. We could just, when the form submits, we could actually just grab like the form search value. And then we could send that back up
What's the benefit of
to,
doing it this way?
I wanted to be able to show you an example. I found actually that like most of the components I do write are controlled components. One of the benefits would be that like if you need to actually interrupt the on change handler, if you're going to do like input masking, for example, so you only want to accept numbers, then what you could do is you could say if e.target.value is a number, then go ahead and set state, else it just gets lost into the void and nothing actually ends up happening on that input. Because the state never changes, that input never gets re-rendered. So even though you're mashing on your keyboard, nothing actually happens. Does that make sense? It's kind of.
For like if you're doing a like an autocomplete, you don't want like some back-end API thing triggering on every single keystroke.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to like wait until you've done typing a little bit.
Debouncing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in the case that you are submitting things off to the API real quick, then that would be crazy. Okay.
What?
So like, doing controlled elements is just kind of the expectation when you're working with React, you're going to write control.
Yeah.
So it's, kind of even where you might not need to in that case, you pretty much always do so that every component looks the same instead of some work one way and some work another.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, like, depending on where you are and who you're writing code with, like, it'll change. When I'm doing stuff on my own, I try to, like, keep it how it's just the simplest way possible. But when you're working with a whole team of developers, sometimes it's easier to, maintain a, hey, let's do everything this way, move on with life.
You can pull a library in or something, it's all going to be written this way. So
Yeah. Yep. So with the element code,
So it actually replaces that element
Correct.
happily with whatever you sent it?
correct.
Oh.
And that's, ooh,
I had no idea. You could-
that's magic right there.
I had never seen that.
Yeah, it's. I debated whether I should like throw this in here, and I was gonna try and just skip it because it's weird.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. So what he's pointing out is that like, so this button, what it's receiving here are the different props that get passed into it.
From the DOM?
Yeah, from our render function. So our button is right here. This is going to be the children, whatever appears as a child of that element. And then these props themselves are going to come through as on the button component. They're going to get passed through in the function. Everything is a function at the end of the day. So even like a React class compiles down to or transpiles down to a function. Here I've just taken the liberty of like, let's not even use a React component. Let's just declare a variable called button, and it's an arrow function, fat arrow, fancy JavaScript, and it's just gonna immediately render out whatever element gets passed to it. You can see here that I have a default prop set so that it's button. So that if you did call button and you didn't actually specify what element you wanted, it's gonna render it as a button on the page rather than an A tag or span or anything else. Enough of that button. Back to the search. So you can see here that onSubmit is a function on our form itself. And what we're gonna do is we're going to, when we call this onSubmit function, then we're going to call another onSubmit function and pass it what our actual query is. So this .props.onSubmit would be the onSubmit function getting passed to the search box. So we got to figure out where is our search box. So our search box is on the search page. And you can see here that the search box takes in a single prop, and that's onSubmit, which will be this .onSearch, which is a function right here that takes in a query. And if it has a query, then we're going to tell our search that, hey, we're loading something. We're going to make our HTTP request to the search endpoint. Here you can see that we're actually making use of that object that we have to pass different options in. The options we're going to pass are params. The Spotify web API expects Q with the query value, which will be a string, and then it expects a type. I have this hard-coded to artist right now. Technically, we could, whoa, Google Keep, get out of here. Technically, we could change this so that you could search for artist, you could search for album, you could search for individual songs. But for the sake of the demo, all of this happened because our damn input was auto-completing. So on our form, we're going to autocomplete equals off. And this is just regular HTML autocomplete. So get out of here and, oh, that's live. Cool. So now when I type, it doesn't actually autocomplete. Shit. What happened? It shouldn't be. So one of the things about the implicit grant flow is that it requires a callback URL. And so I've whitelisted both localhost and my React, Spotify demo, iGravity, whatever. Which, like, this is what I was talking about that I was pitching myself. That's my plug right there. But yeah, I'm still happy to talk about React. I love React. So
You should make it if there's an arrow page and hides your impersonal.
yeah, yeah. And here we're gonna do a code along. Let's go ahead and add that.
Did it load your V stuff at the top?
It did.
I mean, did it actually render?
I wonder if we broke something. Did it actually render? Yeah, it did. Let's take this away. Huh? Oh, I deleted. Someone made me delete my onChange function. Yeah, cool. So technically, this .state.query was an empty string. So our search results was doing nothing. But now we got that, and now I removed my autofocus, autocomplete equals off, and unit tester for chumps. Whoa, sorry, like, writing tests for UI is interesting and difficult. It's not for chumps, I'm sorry. That's my designer side speaking, please forgive me. So this would be like, I like Blink-182, don't judge me. An example of kind of drilling all the way down. Florence. So you can see we get that loading state. Here we're getting back all the results. Our artist. So our artist page itself is going ahead and firing off 2 API requests. One to get all the albums for that artist, and then another one just to get like the artist data, which I use to pull in an image. So you can see here that, hey, if we don't have the albums or the artist data, go ahead and throw a loading indicator, else we have it. So let's go ahead and just cleanly pull the data that we need from what we get back. And let's go ahead and render that in 2 different components, one called page title and one called artist results. So when we click into an artist, you can see page title is everything that you see here. It contains an icon, which the icon in this case is actually the image. It contains a title, which we pass in the artist name. And then it contains a prop called can go back, which this is essentially just saying that that's true, which is going to render us a back button, which will take us one thing up the stack in the navigation, in the browser's navigation. Just to show another, this is what they call like I said earlier, it's a functional component. So this component itself doesn't actually have any state. It's just, it's read-only pretty much. It's accepting a bunch of props and then it's rendering something based on what it accepts. So if we have can go back, if that's true, then we're gonna go ahead and show a button with an arrow, else it'll just return null and nothing will render. If we have an icon, let's do the same thing. And then if we have a title, let's go ahead and render a title. Cool. So let's see here. How am I doing on time? Almost out of time. Am I good? Okay. One of the things that I wanted to do is this only went down to this level, and then it's play and nothing actually happened. So I got the idea an hour before I drove here that hey, we could totally add an actual Spotify player into this application. So we're gonna do that. Nothing's gone wrong so far, so I'm feeling good. I mean, pretty much nothing's gone wrong.
Point out one thing before you start down that route.
Yeah.
So if you just copy that URL that you have up there and paste it in a new tab.
Hey. And so I did some stuff to make that happen. That stuff being that in order for this to load, we need an access token. So in our, get out of here, this editor. So in our, this is our index.js is the very top level of our React component. It's got our router itself. It's got a component called scroll top, which this is just a listener for if the page changes, go ahead and move us back up to the top of the page. Because we're a single page application, and as we're routing through the application, we're not actually making requests and rendering new pages. We actually have to control that behavior if we want that scrolling behavior. Otherwise, if you're kind of halfway scrolled down in a list and you click onto an item and it takes you to the next page, you'll be halfway scrolled down the next page. So that's just a little scroll top component I made. And I didn't make it, I copied it from the React router documentation. And then the app itself is our top level route. So in the app component itself, you can see that we have a constructor. So this is where the magic is happening for handling that entire authorization of the Spotify Web API. So you can see here that we start with 2 variables, authorized and a stored access token. And then I have this if statement. We're going to take a look at the location, which is the browser's location, and we're going to check the path name. And if it's /authorized, that means that we're coming back from the Spotify Web API implicit grant flow dealio. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to parse that location hash, which is just a little utility method I made. Nope, I stole it from Stack Overflow. JavaScript is great. Stack Overflow is great. So it takes the location hash, splits it out into array, and just gives us back what we need for the authorized. So it's going to return us an object of everything that was in the location hash. And it's going to set the access token in local storage. So that's where the magic happened when we went from one page to the next, is that our browser's local storage looked up and saw that it had an access token. So it went ahead and it used that. Since that is all happening in the app's constructor, it's all happening before any of the JavaScript is actually rendered out to the page. So then we're able to actually render out the exact page we want without flashing something beforehand. Cool. So my idea to add a song, I gave this like a quick run through, which is why I was like, okay, this can probably happen. One thing that's nice about React is that people build components, just like individual UI components for all different things. So I was like, React, Spotify player, GitHub. And I was like, okay, cool, this top link looks like it'll do the trick. I didn't look at any of the other ones because we're cool. So we go ahead and we see this is their package. That's what it's going to look like. That's not very zoomed in. That's what the code that we're going to use to render this out to the page is going to look like. So we're not even concerned about anything that Spotify player is doing. We could go and look at their code, but we're assuming that, hey, if we pass these different props into it, most importantly being this URI prop, which contains the Spotify URI to go and look up that album or that individual track, then we're good. So let's go ahead and follow their instructions. npm install, once again, that's our package manager. It's going to go out and it's going to fetch all the dependency that it needs. It's going to barf out a bunch of stuff. Whoa, remove delete packages. That's great. Yeah, for real, I can't believe that. That's my favorite number. Cool, so we've got that package. Yeah, so there's multiple package managers for Node. npm is the actual registry itself. There's 2 different CLIs. I traditionally use Yarn. It's one that's maintained by Facebook, and it doesn't break.
Yep.
What's up?
It's the new one that's actually halfway decent.
Yeah, no, and it's like, I mean, they say that they're about the same speed now, but it was much faster when it came out.
It actually locks by default.
Yeah, so they shipped it with a lock file, which is nice. You can see here that we just did that. Okay, cool. So now I'll start, and hopefully it doesn't barf.
And the nice thing about the Create React app, when you do start, it automatically opens up your browser.
Yeah, localhost 3000 is already there. It's already connected to WebSocket so that it can push through the updates to your JS files instantly. None of that you have to worry about. Ships the whole bundle, everything else. Cool, so let's see here. We need to import Spotify player from React Spotify player. So I'm going to do this at the very top level of our app, since like if we're listening to music, we want it to be available no matter what page we're on. Even if we like head back up to the search, we still want our player to be on the page. If we did it down the tree, then as we navigated back up, it would be removed. So import Spotify player from React, and then we'll just go and grab their Spotify player. We'll put it above everything else, and we will grab their settings that they're passing in. Oh, nice. Let me change that so it's not so tall. Cool. So maybe that worked. Hey! So Star by Lena Swanberg. Yeah. It should. At least it worked earlier. And I assumed that it's because it's making a request from the same domain. But I don't know why that didn't work. Ooh. Ooh. Yeah, that's weird. Woo. Huh. I wonder if that's something to do with being here. Because this worked at home. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, doesn't guest network plus Spotify?
Even that one?
I'm not on that one. Let me get on that one and see if it changes.
Could be.
We're using all the bandwidth on Spotify, man.
Is your album being hard-coded?
What's up?
For the
Is
moment.
your album hard-coded?
Yeah, that's why it's Lena Swanberg rather than Blink 182 California Deluxe Edition. Well, that's trying to actually open up my Spotify. Okay, there we go. Oh, and that maybe that's why it worked earlier, is because I actually had the Spotify app open in the background. I don't know. I'm not gonna. Who knows? As long as Spotify is running on the machine, that works. Yeah, let's. We'll give Alexander Wallen a call later and give him a piece of our mind. Cool. So it is currently hard-coded here. So now we need to actually have it so that it pulls the URI from the list way down the way. So I'm going to add a actually we'll start it as null. So we're going to have state called this.state.uri, which will contain the string for the URI we want. And if I just tried to do this right now, there's a good chance that it's going to break. I don't know if his Spotify player is, yeah, so it's expecting an actual URI to get passed to it. So in order to not break it, we want to only render this if we actually have this.state.uri. So we'll just add a conditional that if we have a URI state, render the Spotify player, else it's just going to return null, and so we actually don't get the player above. Next thing we're going to need is a function in order to update that URI state.
That's getting saved like the local storage.
The URI, it is part of the component's state. So the app component itself, it's just stored in memory on the app component. So if we actually refresh the page, then we would lose that. The only reason why we get access token is because I'm having it pull from the stored access token. So yeah, we could actually save, like when we click play on something, we could also save that to state so that we tracked that. But that's way too fancy. Yeah, and that's what happened when I was messing around with this. I was like, oh, I could add in local storage, and that way we can refresh the page. And then I kept adding stuff, and I was like, oh. Yeah, so we'll have a function called play URI. It'll take in a URI, and then it will set the state on this component URI to whatever URI gets passed in. Cool, so then where are we going to call this play URI? It's actually way down our tree. So our app itself is like, whoa, bug, history back. Ooh, need to write a little check in there that says if there's not anything in your history back, don't actually even render the back button. Ooh, how many windows do I have open? That's a little thing that I wrote a conditional there for, that if you're already signed in, that just is a link now. Cool, so we have our app level, then we have our the routing code earlier. Search and artist are on the same level. So we go down another level, down another level, and then we're into our actual album. And this is where we're going to want to trigger that play function. So it's actually going to be on that album code. So if we go to where album is getting rendered, it's going to be inside of our authorized layout. It's just another thing I did to organize the application. There's home, and then there's the authorized layout containing the actual things that require API requests. And so you can see authorized layout has the search, the artist ID, and then the album. This is where we need to send our play function. So up at the app level, we're going to say play URI equals this dot play URI. So we're going to pass authorized layout a prop called play URI. And yeah, it's got to go all the way down. So now our album needs access to it. And since we're sending it into the route like that, I'm actually going to need to rewrite this real quick. And so React Router is very flexible. It allows you to kind of write things however you want. You can pass it in as a component. You can pass it in as a child. But we're getting an error that we cannot read property params of undefined. And that's because our album component is expecting to be able to look at the params in the URL, and it only gets that from the router, the React router itself. Route is injecting props into the component, and now that it's just a child and it's not an actual prop itself, it's not able to get access to those. So we can just wrap this component itself from React Router. And this is going to do the same exact thing that we were doing before. It's going to give album access to those different router props that it was expecting. So that should fix this error. Nice. And at this point, we can pass our play URI, this.props.play URI. So now album has props called play URI, and that's getting it from the authorized layouts props called play URI. And then album is going to need to pass that to the album results. So this is one of the kind of downsides to React, is that since it's all top down and it's a tree, you have to actually pass stuff all the way down if your state is up here at the app level, or if a function or whatever, if you need to access it way down here, you got to pass it down. That's because we're using the actual like React component state that's built in. You may have heard of Redux. It's a state management library for JavaScript. It works with all the different frameworks. But Redux itself ships with, there's a library called React Redux, which allows you to, from one of your very far leaf nodes, just immediately kind of portal back up to the top level, so you don't actually have to pass stuff down. You can actually just pull it off of the top level state.
I was saying before, if you store this in like the browser storage, you'd kind of be able to bypass that as well, right?
That would probably be like a bad practice. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. So play URI, album results, gets access to this function. And we are almost there. So our album results, you can see that it gets past an items, which items is an array. And we're going to iterate over that, and we're going to render each of those individual results. And so on each of these individual results, we want to have an onClick function, which calls this .props.play URI. I typed it enough. And then we need to pass it the results URI. So I consulted the documentation, and it is stored in literally result.uri. So if we did everything correctly, then when we click on a result, it should pass that function all the way up to our app. Our app will set state with that URI, is like the song, and the Spotify player should render on the page. Hey, play URI is not a function. So close. Album results, play URI. Uh-oh, I didn't save something. I didn't need to save that. I didn't save the very top level app.js. Hey. Maybe. Hey! It worked. Nice. So yeah, so like that's kind of a high-level overview of, I mean, it probably should have been a little more simple, like just individual React components, but I threw a full application with components and data fetching and authentication at you. And I forked it onto the azPHP GitHub repo. So you can, yeah,
We have an azPHP.
come on.
Come on,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, follow, like, subscribe. Cool. Does anyone, I kind of just cruised through that. Does anyone have any questions about anything that happened there? Yeah.
Once you transpile the JavaScript, is the source code the browser is downloading, is that those index.js files too, or is it completely different?
So it's completely different.
Source maps.
Do they still have access to the JavaScript, or is that not like precompiled yet?
Kind of. So it does, like, that's one of the benefits of Create React App is that along with the bundle itself, it ships a source map so that even though like the bundle is all minified and mangled and mashed, you can still inspect stuff in your browser and it'll still show you like the full where to go
You can
for
still
the
debug
things.
during the browser as well.
Yeah.
That React portion of, what was that? The
That's the source of that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and so that is one thing that I was going to show off and then I didn't, is this React DevTools. I really should have used this. That would have been a lot more helpful. This gives us our whole tree view of the entire application, like all the way down. And
different from, well, okay. I'm gonna ask
So-
you different from the DOM, but
yeah, so I mean,
Your state, your process.
yeah, elements still exist and you could go through here. This is how I roll through when I'm styling stuff. But this is wonderful because you've got access to, you can see exactly app, what state it holds, what props it holds. These 3 props that it holds, like by default, it wouldn't have anything. But since it's a route itself, React Router is giving us access to history, location, and match.
That's also how React works, right? So you said it earlier, is the rendering onto the DOM is separate from the React library.
Mm-hmm.
So like, you could have a component, that's what React Native is, instead of rendering to an HTML DOM, you're rendering to a native framework.
Yep.
Same components, only different mapping.
Yeah, so, and then like people have taken it like a step further and they've created libraries like React Native Web. So that it's literally like you write one button component and you can use it on Android, iOS, or on the web. So that's pretty cool.
to that, you, in your code, I noticed like all your little sys have like a combined JavaScript and like a style. Those are all your individual components, right?
With each of these?
In your code, go back to your code.
Yes.
So like in your file tree or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
they've all, most of them have an index.
Yeah, and so that's just how I've chosen to name things. This could be whatever you want it to be.
So you could, for instance, if you wanted to break one of these out as a separate component and put it up somewhere.
Exactly. If I wanted that search box component itself to be something that other people could hook into, then it would be that simple.
So that, how do you say you've got a search box here, but then on another page, like on your main page, you want the search box right in the front and center.
Uh-huh.
But then like on, say you're on other pages, maybe you want to put it in like the top right corner and it's in a slightly different style.
Yeah.
Is there a way to reuse a component and change its styling up a bit?
Yeah, and that's one thing that React is extremely good at, is being able to use the same component all over the different applications. And people have all kinds of opinions on how to do that. But like a button component, someone may make it so that it takes in a size prop. And then the size prop could be a number or it could be a string to small, large. And then maybe you conditionally apply a CSS class name accordingly. You read the props and then you set a class name based on whatever props.size came through as. Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah, so in your button components, if you can go to that real quick.
Yep.
So notice you're using the default props. Since you're
Yep.
using ES6 styling and you have the rest operator, why can't you also use the default prop thing within your button call?
So with an actual React component, like a component class, you can move the default props in to actually be static on that class. But since this is literally just a function, we're not able, like it's just returning JSX. It's not returning anything else.
So in other words, you couldn't have in your function call element equals button.
Oh yeah, no, I could have done that.
You wouldn't actually need button at default.
Yeah, I could have done like element or button, something like that. That's not actually how it would be written, but yeah, sometimes I do choose to do that. I think like my icons. Yeah, so it takes in a width and a height, but rather than actually specifying like a logo.default props width height, I just say like, hey, use the width, but if it comes through as null or undefined, just set it to 100% string. So yeah,
I was at the Arizona JavaScript meeting this week.
cool.
And they were talking about various development tools.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a list, hierarchy of what goes. React seemed to be kind of at the end of the list of things that you should know before you try to React.
Yeah, so React is like so hot right now. It's like the go-to along with kind of Vue and Angular for like you're building a user interface on the web and you need a JavaScript library. Gone are the days of shipping templates and jQuery. People are shipping these full React apps now.
As
Yeah.
far as like different JavaScript applications, this is one of the huge issues, in my opinion, of the JavaScript community, is that they love to jump on anything new. And React itself has an awesome community around it. It has a ton, I mean, it's been around for 5-6 years now.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of stuff for it, but you know, people like to jump off and let's all use Vue now. It's only 3 months old, but hey, ooh, sure.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
You want Stack Overflow, and the average lifespan of a JavaScript library, is 2 years.
Yeah, it doesn't
So
surprise
React
me.
It's done and it's being in the process of being replaced.
No.
But it's still good.
Yeah, so one thing that like kind of separates React from the other libraries is that it's kind of like decoupled. At the end of the day, you are writing JavaScript. These are just JavaScript files. And so it's kind of nice, like if you have that application structure and you have the idea of components throughout your app for building your user interface, it's going to be not too bad like if React does go out the window, because it'll just be a matter of shifting your components to whatever the next library is. React's not going anywhere.
Well, no, I'm not saying it is.
Yeah.
But you can actually already see it. You can see that if you start looking on Reddit or whatever for the hot JavaScript articles, they've shifted on to Vue.
Yeah.
It's just that's the way the JavaScript works. It doesn't mean there's not going to be more React development being done over the next 5 years than Vue. It just means kind of the
No, and it's
hotness is slowly shifting. It doesn't mean anything.
yeah, it's kind of cool to see like the different pieces from the different libraries. They kind of like as React evolves, they're starting to pull pieces from Vue that they really like. So one thing that Vue is like extremely good at is that you have your file and it has like the CSS, the JavaScript, and like the HTML all in the same file. And what?
Right back where we started.
Yeah. See, and like I'm completely on board for this. Like as a designer, I've been throwing CSS at pages for years and years, and it gets like out of control way too quickly. Like you'll start editing a selector and then a button like 6 pages over will shift to the left and you're like, why? And with React, it's like everything is a component. It's all like Legos basically, like it's just piece by piece.
So, being that you're at a PHP meetup, is accepting and displaying data from the backend something you can quickly demonstrate, or is that a lot?
It's essentially the same as what
Yeah.
Spotify. Just using Spotify itself.
Yeah, you could use that Axios library and call your own API.
Yeah, so these are nothing more than HTTP requests. So you could be running a PHP server alongside of it.
So if you're using this as, if you were getting more complex with this application, you might switch that out and start using a state management library like Redux and move that functionality in towards Redux. That way it's not coupled directly.
And that's even one of the benefits to moving it out is like technically Redux works with all the different libraries. So if you have your state management all running through that system, you could technically render a Vue component on the page and a React component on the page, and they could be reading from the same store.
So now you got some hotness.
Yeah, there we go. Let's get fancy. Yeah.
I'm gonna do two.
Yeah.
First, what made you pick Spotify for this?
Gordon told me to.
That's beautiful. Okay,
Yeah.
that's perfect.
Consistency.
I was just, yeah, we did like every PHP framework with Spotify.
Yeah, so that's what he told
I
me.
picked it randomly, I was touched.
No. Okay, so if I'm going to pick it, let me show you a few projects that I've made with React. FreeDirtAlert.com.
Reader?
Yeah. So like if, you're looking for fill dirt and you're like, where can I find dirt? Look no further, FreeDirtAlert.com. Yeah, so it's like a little project I made on the side. This takes you to a city's route, which then you can choose a city, at which point it fetches JSON from the server and renders it on the page. It's on my GitHub if you want to look at like another React app. It's pretty freaking sweet. I did it like mostly I wanted to learn Docker and Node a little bit, so I wrote a Node script that would fetch RSS from Craigslist, convert it to JSON, and then let's see here. Then it would basically like rebuild my application and bundle it and ship it to a static server. So it's all like it's 100% static. Even like the data that's coming back is just a static JSON file. And then it links out to the Craigslist posting from wherever it was. No, I need one though. That'd be great. You're welcome to write one. So that's all there on freedirtalert.com. It's got a cute logo as well. That's one more thing that I've made. This one I made over winter break, and I very much enjoyed working on it. This is a card game using Google's BoardGame.io framework or library. So it's basically, it actually uses Redux under the hood. But BoardGame.io is a state management for turn-based games. And it's a JavaScript library, BoardGame.io. So it's like not official Google, but it's Google open source. And so this game, you try to match up like the animals with the animals. If you don't have one, then you have to pass. I have a bug that sometimes it takes a while to get a match. So come on. Come on. There we go. Yeah, so then it places the card, gives you your points, and you move on to the next one. So this is a React app. It's also on my GitHub if you wanted to take a look at that. Their demo was like a tic-tac-toe game. And so I literally like started from their tic-tac-toe game and then took it from being like a 3x3 board to being a 13x13 board. And then, yeah.
Instead of starting with one tile, you start with 4.
So my idea is that I'm gonna like rig it so the deck is technically shuffled, but like the top 2 cards on the deck are gonna be guaranteed to match up. So that way it's like, yeah, that way it's like you get the game going a little quicker, because once you actually do have some, they start connecting a little easier. But yeah. Dang, I'm bad at this game. So yeah, any other questions about React? Well, yeah.
It's not React related, but
No.
you are the resident JavaScript expert.
Oh, okay, maybe.
In a room full of PHP folk, you are the front-end king.
Thank you.
Given the developments around like class syntax and import syntax, which is coming, and projects like TypeScript and Facebook's Flow getting kind of some traction, where do you see, as the voice of JavaScript in the trend, where do you see static typing in JavaScript maybe like in the next year or so?
Super hot right now.
Super hot right now?
Yes.
If I was a PHP guy, diving in on static typing in JavaScript or ignoring it because it's a fad?
Dive in. It's like when I'm looking up libraries to use and pull into my applications, the ones that actually have typing. like, yeah, these developers actually like care a little bit and they know what their applications are doing or their components libraries are doing. That being said, like, I guess the place I just got a job at uses Flow, so I'll have to get on the typing train. I'm very much a like full speed ahead. Let's just
Move
build,
fast and break
like,
things.
no, don't break things, but like build shit. Like, yeah, tests are good when you know you need them and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
As a follow-on to that,
Yeah.
I got an email from Galvanize saying that they have a JavaScript class online available.
oh nice.
That's probably the basic stuff.
No, and like that's one of like the more difficult parts about this is that Gordon mentioned like, hey, some people may not have like even be using JavaScript. And with all the latest frameworks, libraries, like it's a lot of hot new technology and everyone's using the latest syntax and everything else. So it may have been like a lot, but I tried to keep it so it follows all the examples you'll find on the web for the most part. So
It was awesome.
thank you.
Yep.
Nice.